Blaire White fan page 2. You are live.
Thank you so much for letting me into the podcast. I am so grateful that you gave me a chance to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so I came here to discuss some topics that we already, I sent you on DMs.
Mhm.
So for a little context for your viewers, we're going to be talking about non-binary topics. We're going to be talking about LGBT, arguments, like LGBT versus LGBT and LGBTQ against LGBT and all that. Kind of discussing lactation because I don't want to debate because not only are you going to destroy me because I'm literally new to, discussing. I just want to talk and I just want to hear your point of view.
Yeah, we can absolutely discuss on all of those topics. Thank you so much. Where would you like to start? I first ask, what's your name and what can I call you by?
Okay, so my name is Layla and she, her, I guess.
All right, sounds good, Layla. Thanks for coming on. Where would you like to start?
I would like to start on breastfeeding, which is like the main thing that I brought up in our DMs. So my main point is asking, so when you first started going to the doctor for these topics, how did it go? How did it start? Like, how was it that you came and asked, how can I breastfeed my child? Kind of interested in knowing that.
I had done all the research myself beforehand to figure out what I would need to do to be able to breastfeed my child. Essentially, I just had a conversation with my doctor where I was like, hey, I'm going to be working to induce lactation to be able to breastfeed my child. Is there anything I should be concerned about, be aware of, anything I should know, anything we should test for? She was like, oh, given all the medicines you're taking, that's all good. I'm going to go ahead and do like a double check with the WPATH standards for lactation in trans women, see if there's anything that we should be aware of. And she got back to me and was like, everything looks good. Yeah, you are good to breastfeed your kid.
Yeah, I assume you did a lot of research beforehand talking to your doctor, right? Mm-hmm. I assume, and you found all these cases that are in your documents, right?
Yep.
That sounds so, new. And I understand how people can be concerned on Twitter. I do certainly feel it's super scary to feel like people are doxing, like trying to dox you or just giving you a lot of threats. I feel terrible. I know that they might be concerned, but I've definitely been through doxing threats before and I know how scary it can be.
I think that there are good faith questions that people can ask. And I think that some people have asked in good faith, like, are you working with a doctor? Do we know anything about like hormones being transmitted into breast milk? Yeah, I'm happy to answer those questions. And that's why I wanted to put out kind of like a nice little summary of the research just to help ease the concerns of anybody that really wants to learn about this in good faith.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to, bring a point. Your channel is mostly about debating and stuff. But I really feel like you have your articles and everything that you've sent on your Twitter and you make it public and everything. But I really feel like for some people who are, ignorant and don't want to read, or lazy, you can always just make like a 10 minutes video or a 30 minutes video and just, make a summary of all the articles. Because I've been reading through your documents and, while it was very interesting, it was very complicated for me as, someone who is new to these topics, to understand because of, all the, for a lot of duck tone or stuff like that. I'm sorry if I'm, butchering the name.
Yeah, I actually do have 2 videos on kind of like the breastfeeding topic so far that are on my YouTube. In the first one, I do a little bit of an overview of the research, and the second one was the debate I had with that basic channel girl, where at the end of that, I actually just went through and talked about a little bit of summary of the peer-reviewed research we have. So those are both out there and on my YouTube channel. They might not be in a spot where it's as easy as for people to find it, but I mean, it is possible I could cut it into like a separate segment if people just want to see about like the research on breastfeeding in trans women. The tweet with like the research summary has been circulating around quite a lot. I see actually a lot of people that have been, taking that image and then like copying it and sending it in like transphobes that they're arguing with, which it really has become a community resource within kind of like the Twitter sphere and within broader education on the topic, which I'm really glad to see.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say because, your articles already say how it's safe and everything. Something I'm interested about is, you sent on Twitter an image of you, making milk with the machine and everything. And, you censored the other part.
The nipple.
And yeah. And I'm interested in knowing how the procedure works, like how do you turn on the machine or just like, how does it work? What does it do?
So essentially you press a single button and the breast pump turns on. I'm using the Spectra S2. It's a very, very well-liked breast pump within the lactation community. And essentially, it has two modes. It has a letdown mode and a like milking mode. Letdowns is when like your breasts are stimulated such that they start shooting out milk. Is essentially what you're trying to do, and that involves kind of like a faster sucking motion. So essentially, what the breast pump does is it simulates how a baby would like suck on a nipple. And so in the letdown mode, it does like faster sucking with like less pressure. And then when you switch it to the regular mode, like the milk extraction mode, it does longer, more high pressure sucks. That's better at like actually squeezing out the milk once you triggered like a letdown in your body. When you're just like starting out breast pumping, you would breast pump for about 5 minutes at a time, 3 times a day. I'm pretty soon going to have to be upping that to like 6 times a day, probably closer to like 10 minutes a pump. And eventually at like the maximum, you'll be pumping about every 2 hours for almost like 20 minutes at a time. Like if you're in full-on milk production mode, like you have to be pumping very frequently. That's one of the reasons why my partner is not really able to lactate in general. Like she works at a hospital, and so 12-hour shifts, having to like go away every 2 hours to pump for like almost 20 minutes, it's like impossible to keep up. It's a real struggle that like a lot of working moms deal with. Also, hello, the Surfs TV with a rating party of 254. Welcome, welcome from the Nom Nom community.
So my question is, how does the machine make you tired? Because you know how some procedures of like, you know, when it relates to the body, like it can make you very tired or exhausted.
Yeah, after you trigger a letdown, it makes you feel very hormonal. So there's a lot of oxytocin in particular, which is released when you actually have a letdown. It's like the bonding hormone. Things like physical touch release oxytocin. Giving birth, I think, is the most oxytocin releasing activity that the human body can do. Other things like orgasms are big on oxytocin. And yeah, when you have a letdown, it also releases oxytocin. It can make you feel very like warm in kind of like that bonding hormonal kind of way. It can also make you feel a little bit crazy in like a hormonal kind of way. But it's something that you get used to more over time. Even at the very beginning, when I was only producing colostrum, like I remember the hormonal letdowns were a lot more intense, but that's more so because I wasn't used to them.
For how long have you been doing like these, you know, these breastfeeding? I just wanted to ask, like, you know, have you been doing this for a while and only now you started sharing it on Twitter, or have you been just starting and sharing it on Twitter as well?
Yeah, I started 2.5 weeks ago. And I have been like, it seems my body was just made to milk. Like things have been going very smoothly. Kind of like the first couple days I was producing some drops of colostrum. Then by about like day 4, my milk turned white and really came in. By about the 2-week mark, I was able to like actually like shoot ropes of milk. Nowadays I can produce like about 2 ounces of milk a day, which is not enough to sustain a baby. It's not close to enough to sustain a baby. I know that in the first case report of the trans woman, she was able to make up to 8 ounces of milk a day at kind of like peak, that's about how much you would need for like a newborn. And yeah, we'll see how much I'm able to produce. I'm guessing I'm gonna be able to produce more than she did because of how well the process has been going for me. My goal right now is to supplement my baby's current diet of formula, and she's still kind of transitioning to solid foods, so we're just going to be smoothing out that transition process with some supplemented breast milk.
Aside from the drops, how do you feel from your first time, you know, started doing all the procedures compared to today? Like, does it, you know, make you feel, does it pump more?
It pumps a lot more. I would say kind of the biggest difference in feeling is at the beginning it was very like new and unknown and very hormonal. These days it's more kind of just like a routine activity that I have to do. Like, you know, people like brush their teeth in the morning or they go to bed. People take their medicine. This takes about like 5 minutes, 3 times a day right now. Although, you know, I think it's going to keep on being easier and easier, but just more of like a routine thing.
I don't have many more questions about, you know, breastfeeding, so maybe we can already move to non-binary.
Let's go for it. What do you want to talk about with respect to non-binary identity in particular?
You know, many people, you know, Blaire White, just fuck Angel, Ariel Scarcella, Marcus, Kelly, anyone do not respect non-binary identity. I personally, you know, I do respect it. Like, I do have my own questions sometimes, but like, I personally respect it. But I do have some questions. Like, for example, how can you be non-binary and also use she, her pronouns? Or how can you, you know, be a non-binary mother or a non-binary dad, or, you know, all these sea eagle, I think, or whatever?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to explain. often kind of like when people that don't really understand non-binary identity try to conceive a non-binary identity, they think of someone who is either they see themselves as like exactly in between being a boy or a girl, or they see someone who is like, I'm neither a boy nor a girl. But for like a lot of non-binary people, it's important to recognize that non-binary identity forms this big spectrum of identity. So there are some non-binary people who are rather masculine. There are some non-binary people who are rather feminine. The way that they express their gender might be differently than the way that they understand their own gender. And a non-binary identity just has to do with that own self-perception, the way you understand yourself. There are some non-binary people that might also view themselves as kind of both non-binary and a woman, or maybe both non-binary and a man. People have come up with micro-labels for this, such as like a demi-girl or a demi-boy, which would refer to somebody who they see themselves as kind of non-binary, kind of a woman, or kind of non-binary, kind of a man. Some people also experience their non-binary identity in more of a fluid way, where it's like, at some points I see myself more as a woman, versus at other points I see myself more as a non-binary human. I would say that my non-binary identity is definitely more like the fluid type, and kind of just how I understand myself. For a lot of non-binary people, their non-binary identity might not influence how they are perceived and treated socially. It's just about how they understand themselves as a human being. And so, you know, I know that regardless of whether or not I'm currently like viewing myself more in a non-binary kind of light or more in like a woman kind of light, that's not going to change how somebody at the grocery store is going to see me and then call me she, her, because they're just like, oh, Naomi looks like a woman, I'm she, her. And that's okay. I think that it's simultaneously okay to recognize that kind of the way that we experience gender in society can be very different than the way that we understand our own gender internally. And that's what non-binary identity is all about.
You know, I'm probably going to have to rewatch the live later to, you know, kind of like get the point. But yeah,
if you have
thank
any
you for
specific
answering
questions,
that.
I would love to like delve in a little bit further. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. So there's something I saw, like some studies, you know, how we have all these studies about how trans women or trans men have like, you know, brain structure similar of like a woman or a man.
Yeah.
I saw a study somewhere around, which I already forgot what it said, but that there's a new studies have been showing that, you know, there's like a non-binary brain structure apparently now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if you know about that. And if you do, I would like to, you know, if you could dwell on that,
Yeah,
so I could understand further.
I actually have that in my research doc. If you go to the Sex is Not a Binary section of my research doc, the 4th article from the top, it's titled Beyond the Binary, Rethinking Sex in the Brain. Very good peer-reviewed research article that summarizes the literature we have on gendered brains and on like trans brains. And what's really fascinating is really what this research shows when we look at it all holistically is that most brains reside somewhere in kind of like this non-binary multivariate space where it's not like you can say like blue brains are on this end of the spectrum, those are boy brains, pink brains are on this end of the spectrum, those are girl brains, but rather there's this whole collection of brain traits that exist in this messy cloud of characteristics. And within this messy cloud of characteristics, certain traits are more often observed in women, certain traits are more often observed in men, but most people's brains are going to have a mix of female typical and male typical brain characteristics. Most brains actually reside somewhere in this non-binary cloud of space. And so what's very interesting is that this doesn't refute the literature on trans brains that shows that like a trans woman's brain on average skews more towards feminine traits than masculine traits. What it also goes to show is that like, you know, our brains aren't binary. We are a complex mosaic of brain characteristics. The differences between like men's and women's brains is so small and so variable from person to person that there's definitely something going on there in the transgender brain. But at the same time, we're a lot closer to each other than we previously thought. And that's very cool. And yeah, if you're interested, Beyond the Binary, Rethinking Sex in the Brain, fantastic research article going over all this research.
Yeah, I will read it later. So the reason why I haven't been able to like, I've been reading before our debate while you were talking to Noodles. I was like reading a lot of your articles and even beforehand the debate. And I didn't have the time. Like I was stressing because I only had like an hour for reading everything. So I was just, you know, checking the most important things that, you know, what's going to relate to, you know, our talk. And I actually stayed for like literally everything. At least most of the things that I could. read,
Mhm.
and yeah, very interesting. There might have been some stuff that I disagreed with, but that's just like my disagreements. But there's other things that I can't just
Sure.
reject everything, because all these stuff correlates to like scientists, like our actual scientists have been like checking all these things. So I
Mhm.
don't want to, at this very moment, I don't want to go on like saying, oh no, this isn't a thing. Oh no, that's fake, because I'm just a person learning right now, and then maybe some years later when I know more, I'll get to have more of a say, like maybe more points against maybe than or.
Absolutely. I think that that's a very healthy attitude to have in general. A lot of people have this attitude where we're like when they don't understand something, they might fear it or hate it or, stigmatize it. But just the idea of like, I don't know everything on a topic, but I'm interested in learning more and I'm gonna make my opinion once I'm, fully informed, especially looking at, what the science actually says on a topic. That's a wonderful attitude to have, and I always would encourage you to keep pursuing that attitude. Learning is awesome. Learning is base.
Yeah, it totally is. I love learning myself. And, some years back, the first trans YouTubers that I've always found were like, Samantha Logs or Sam Collins and all that
Hmm.
creators of content. It was like a year later that I found Blaire White and, Buck Angel and Ariel, and I started like leaning more into
Ooh,
them. And
I
I know how questionable it can be to you, but like I have kind of my reason as to why I like, their content. And it's because before I used to think, like you, I was more left leaning, like more
mhm.
on to, something like trans woman or women or all that stuff. I know some friends are gonna be watching right now, so I'm just gonna have to announce that yes, I am a trans woman. But my mom used to tell me you're never gonna be a woman and all that. But it wasn't a bad stage. She was just in her thoughts saying, all that stuff. Then it was then when I found Blaire White and her content and just everything and all the content she will make. And it was then when I found that I gravitated more into them than into
Mhm.
left. However, I don't ever ignore left points. I also, I take both points and then make up my own mind. I don't just, just because I gravitate into them, that doesn't mean that I don't, sometimes take the points of the other
Mhm.
side.
I would be very careful with those creators you mentioned in particular, especially I do not believe that they are good faith actors who would, actually like dive into the research on something and change their mind if they were wrong about it. They very much seem to be motivated by political funding, which is coming from like right wing think tanks and that kind of stuff. I'd be very careful with those types. I think that they are very harmful to the trans community in a lot of ways, and that they're doing so intentionally, which has only gotten worse in recent years.
So about all these things are like the articles and everything that you just said that they gravitate more into talking, I guess, more than taking science into consideration.
Hmm.
Blaire, at least Blaire, like I know that she said that she has changed her mind over a couple years about different topics, and yada yada. There's just some things that she hasn't. She will never change her mind on, which is like children transitioning. But I know that she said that, if there's something she finds and, is covered by science, she will change her mind. That's something
But
that I
like she's
know
come on to say
she
that
said.
like she would never change her mind on that kind of stuff. That seems like the opposite of what you're saying just now. I'm kind of curious, like why do you feel drawn to these types, especially given that like what really I think is bad about types like Blaire White and Ariel Scarcella is that instead of focusing their advocacy on like education, on making broader pushes for acceptance of trans people, they often try to belittle and attack the most vulnerable amongst us. Like Blaire White has dozens of videos where essentially all she's doing is pointing and laughing at like a non-binary person who she doesn't believe to be valid in their gender identity, or somebody that she thinks is crazy. And when you just have so much of a focus of your channel and your content on hating people who don't wish you harm, and maybe they're a little bit misguided, or maybe they're people that aren't very good at making arguments, but I just don't see why you would want to rile up transphobic hate against non-binary people or like people that are very queer, have colored hair, etc., when there is vitriolic hate on the right that you could be working to dismantle and to, push for broader acceptance. Shoving down non-binary people does not make it easier for queer people to exist.
Yeah, sometimes people are just never gonna change their mind on some stuff. But I even though I am a fan of Blaire and I love her and everything, I do not condone everything she's done, like the Janae situation or just all that, or Riley Dennis, or just everything that's happened. I just because I love her doesn't mean I condone all of her actions. Just the same as I do not condone bad actions from everyone. And I do always point it out. Like when I see something that's bad to me, I point it out, even though I love them.
If you look at like Blaire White's most recent videos, it's her attacking Mr. Beast's friends Chris just for being trans.
Have you seen this?
It's her talking about the shooter who was trans to rile up more transphobic hate. It's talking about TikTok convincing kids that they're trans. This Eliza Blue person, I don't know who they are. They look queer. They have purple hair. Talking about insane trans TikTok, trans aid. Like it's all just like attacking queer people. Is every single one of her most 6 recent YouTube videos.
I think she mostly focuses on like people that she finds aren't like actual trans people, I guess. Like there's also
but like why would you I guess like why would you go out of your way to attack them? I mean, if you don't think they're like the same kind of like trans person as you are, you can certainly talk about how like your lived experience differs from their lived experience, but going out of your way to attack them and to incite transphobic hate against them, it just riles up hate against trans people even further.
Blaire has some videos about reacting to woke, quote unquote woke TikToks. And
all 6 of her most recent videos are just attacking queer people. Like that's all she does these days.
Yeah. So, so in the rise of, LGBT or LGBTQ and all that acceptance, there's been more people gravitated to, being trans or being, sapphic, or all these new terms that are confusing a lot of people. And there's even like people saying being like non-binary lesbian and stuff like that, which is can be kind of confusing to a lot of people.
Well, yeah, but that's my exact point is instead of just like attacking queer people, why doesn't she like try to educate about queer people, or even on the people that she might find weird? Like my position is more like, if somebody's doing something weird, as long as they're not like harming themselves or others, then I guess that's their freedom, that like they're allowed to be weird. But Blaire doesn't even want people like that to be allowed to do that.
Yeah, maybe you got me there. I know Blaire, has some mistakes. She's done some mistakes, but yeah, I just gravitate toward, like, the reason why I gravitate towards her is because I feel safe with her. That's mostly why.
Well, but if you were a different kind of queer, you wouldn't be safe with her. And that's where the real problem is. If you were, say, non-binary, you wouldn't be safe with her. If you were queer in a way that she didn't like, you wouldn't be safe with her. And there are so many queer people who are made unsafe because of what Blaire does, because of the opinions she spews, because of the content, which she exclusively focuses on attacking queer people these days.
If you know Blaire White fan page, like the original, she had like, she used to be non-binary before she, got rid of the pronouns and everything, and just, started, taking the Mahu personality. Not identity. Sorry. Sorry, I messed up there. And, Blaire, even though the fan page was, on the non-binary identity by then, Blaire still, never said anything negative about them. She even started following them on Twitter and just agreeing, just liking and everything. So I feel it's more, that Blaire just sees some people and just doesn't, I guess, see them valid, I guess, like there's, always going to be confused people because we know the rise of detransitioners and, all these, pronouns rising and everything.
Well,
It can
sure.
certainly
If
be.
you were genuinely concerned about detransitioners, what you would want is for more research to be done on kind of like the diagnostic screening for trans-related healthcare. You would want to have like you would want to have more research. You would want to have more data on the subject. You would want to have better informed doctors. But Blaire doesn't want that to happen. Like Blaire wants trans people to not be allowed to transition until after they're 18. You can't even conduct that research in the world where Blaire White wants. Like if you genuinely care about the plight of detransitioners, then you would want detransitioners to have access to the medical care they need, and you would want, to do the best research we can so that we can figure out who might be at a greater risk of detransitioning and do better consultations and screenings. But Blaire's not doing anything to bring us closer to a world where we have that. Blaire's just attacking trans people and attacking the people that are trying to do this research.
I'm not exactly like the most prepared person here. And, I'm just trying to share some points, but like you're definitely getting to some points where I cannot answer because I'm not, informed enough, which is something that I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to go to Sabrina starting its comment. I personally do not agree with like medical transition for kids because of, 10 years before, when all these trans topics weren't, being brought up. I think, a kid saying, Mom, I feel like a girl would have been like definitely, more important than as of today where, a lot of people are confused,
You
That's,
know, it's really
like for
interesting.
example, wait, I'll end my point. Sorry.
Oh yeah,
If,
yeah.
I'm sorry if I'm being rude.
Have you seen this
Um,
Naomi TikTok?
so,
Have you seen this
you
Naomi
know,
TikTok?
transition, like, okay, let me start from zero. I'll take a chill pill and
Oh
just
wait,
start from zero.
I have something that I'd like to bring up, kind of with respect to the point of like, are people more confused these days? Like, there's more people coming out as trans. People actually said the same thing about left-handed people in the early 1900s. So in about the year 1910, it was the case that only like 3% of the population was left-handed. And the reason why was that society at large demonized left-handedness. Like
Oh
people
yeah,
actually
I
tried
definitely
to
know about the
force
story.
and
Like
convert people out of left-handedness. But like as we saw society start accepting left-handed people, as it became an option for if somebody was at school and their teacher's like, oh hey, are you trying to write with your left hand? Yeah, you can write with your left hand. That's fine. You saw this massive exponential explosion in the rates at which people were coming out as left-handed. And the exact same thing is what's happening with queer people. It's been a thing that for so long, trans people and other queer people just haven't had the language to express who they are. But nowadays, especially with greater education, with greater pushes for acceptance, this youngest generation is actually able to articulate, and more so able to safely articulate who they are, much like the left-handed kids of the early 1900s. And so I don't think it means that they're confused, just like how conservatives tried to argue that all these new left-handed kids were just confused because it had always been 3% of the population that was left-handed. So anybody above 3% must be just confused. No, that wasn't the case. It was just society started accepting and recognizing and allowing people to be who they truly are. Besides, like the rates of detransition amongst even like children who transition is exceptionally low. It's still only like 1 to 2% of even kids who detransition based off of the studies that we have.
So I definitely knew about the story about left-handed people. Like I even had the story about my grandpa. He told me about, back then in his school at least, or everywhere. So teachers every time they will see someone writing with their left hand, they will be slapped in the hand with a ruler and forced to write with the right one. And it definitely is super sad because it even like I know it even goes back as to like connecting with the brain and everything, and the left side of your brain, because I guess it's like the more moral side, I guess. I think. So yeah, my mom told me the whole story about that topic. So
yeah, it's
I
like
definitely
left-handed conversion therapy was exceptionally common, actually kind of the de facto standard back then.
right. I think it was to keep like people quiet. It's like I guess these people were like more brought up into like speaking out about topics that maybe the church didn't agree with, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess like my question to you is, so suppose that like there are more trans people now than people who came out as trans before. Given that the rates of detransition, even amongst children who transition, is exceptionally low, like 1 to 2%. That's far less than the regret rate of most medical procedures, by the way. Even most like pediatric medical procedures, that's a far lower regret rate. I guess like what's the issue? You know, more trans people exist. I don't think there's anything wrong with trans people existing. So what's the problem?
Yeah, I don't think that, trans people existing is a problem at all whatsoever. However, I do think that, children being led, like, okay, if you transition medically and do not regret, I am so grateful for you. I'm very happy for you.
Yeah,
However, I feel really bad for those who get like double mastectomies at like 16 and stuff, like Chloe Cole, for example. You know how Chloe Cole got like double mastectomies at 16 and then she later regretted it. So that happens to some other people, and it's, it really sucks.
Yeah, so my heart goes out to anybody who has medical regret over any procedure, but it's important to get the facts straight. Chloe Cole is the 1% case. Out of trans people who go on to get surgeries, the medical regret rate is 1% across the board. And it's unfortunate when people have medical regret. I think it's very unfortunate for the 5% of people who get LASIK eye surgery that regret it. I think it's very unfortunate for the 20% of people who get knee replacement surgery and regret it. And I think that there is more that we can do to access, better medical care for people that have medical regret, and I'm all for that. I think there's more that we can do to come up with better diagnostic and screening criteria. That's only going to get better with research. But at the same time, just because 1% of the population has medical regret does not mean that they have the right to take away the right to medical treatment, which is shown to be profoundly beneficial for the 99%. The 99% deserve to have their medical care, even if the 1% is going to make a mistake. And my heart goes out to them, but your mistake does not mean that I don't get my treatment.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. There's also something I want to talk about. It's like puberty blockers.
Yeah.
And so
I love puberty blockers.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything against it right now because like I'm not very well informed. However, I have seen like this article. I saw 2 articles,
Yeah.
One article that's talked about how this person, like this trans girl, tried to have like vaginoplasty, and she's been like on puberty blockers like since years before, and she died throughout the procedure because she was like, her penis couldn't grow enough, to use the.
Wait, I think I've heard the case that you're talking about. I'm pretty sure she's alive. What the concern?
Oh, is she?
What the concern is for people that people that are seeking bottom surgery. Particularly if they went on puberty blockers at the earliest chance and then cross-sex hormones at the earliest chance, they will have less genital tissue to use for bottom surgery. Testosterone is responsible for the further development of like penis tissue. There are a couple things that you can do to ameliorate this. So one is that you can be prescribed a local testosterone gel that you only apply to the penis. And so essentially this will allow for changes to the penis without changes to the rest of the body. This is something that's been prescribed for people that want to have more material for bottom surgery. The other option is that there are other surgical techniques which don't require as much material. Things, for example, like a combined penile inversion and what's it called? Peritoneum pull-through. Those medical techniques can be combined essentially to still perform bottom surgery even if less material is available. So ultimately it comes down to surgeons that are outdated with their techniques that need to catch up on the research, and also being able to prescribe testosterone gel if more material is needed. These are both things that we can do to alleviate those concerns. But yeah, it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, very interesting. And there's also like the other article that I, said there was 2. And you know how it, people often say about puberty blockers that not only does it stop your, it pauses your puberty, it also like, stops you from like growing mentally, like how, when you start taking like, let's say puberty blockers and you started taking them at like 14 and then you stay mentally as a 14-year-old.
That's not true. So there is some like brain development which is associated with puberty. Essentially, what we've observed in kids that take puberty blockers, including kids that take puberty blockers for precocious puberty, by the way, like, so for example, children before puberty, they don't have those puberty hormones, but they're still mentally developing, right? Like, a 4-year-old to a 5-year-old, they're mentally developing even though they're not currently going through puberty. So that same kind of mental development still happens after you go on puberty blockers. The only thing is that brain changes which are related to puberty are going to be delayed while you're on puberty blockers. And in the case of a trans kid, it's usually like 1 to 2 years that they'd be on puberty blockers. That's kind of like the standard for how long they would be on it. So essentially, it's just going to be a quick delay. And we actually have peer-reviewed research which shows that after that delay, they catch up to their peers very quickly. So no long-term issues there.
There's also like a popular say that, if you stay on puberty blockers like long enough, you can, go infertile and, your fertility will never come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a couple things about that. One is that this is why fertility counseling and fertility banking is very important for trans youth. Actually, for people that are AFAB, even going on puberty blockers should not eliminate your ability to get pregnant, become fertile later in life. It's more so for trans women, where puberty blockers will stop the production of sperm. So what you can do is you can bank sperm before you go on the puberty blockers, and that's something that is by default standard recommended.
Oh, sorry, your microphone cut.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What I was saying is that fertility banking is what's recommended by default by doctors for trans women before you go on like puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, because they want you to assume the worst case scenario that it might make you infertile. And so, yeah, you can bank your sperm to take care of that. It is also possible to like go off of hormones for months or a couple years in order to regain fertility. There was another research study which came out very recently where they had a small sample of trans women who were wanting to regain fertility. And with the help of fertility treatments, every single trans woman was able to regain their fertility that had been on hormones for years, by the way. So it seems to be the case that like with fertility treatments, you can regain fertility, tends to be the case. However, I would recommend, what the doctors recommend by banking sperm before you go on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, just because, there will be no pain or trouble down the line if you just have that in the bank ready to go when you might need it. And if you decide that you don't want to have kids, there was no harm in banking sperm either.
Yeah, I saw some pages and a lot of websites and everything about this topic about, freezing your sperms for, any trans person. And wouldn't it be like super expensive? Like I even saw that it was like around like $1,000 like banking, That's like,
Yeah,
very
so
expensive.
it really depends. And this is something that I think that we as a society can do better at, with like insurance, preferably like public health care, just providing the option for trans people to bank their sperm before they go on HRT. I know that it depending on like what service you go through, it can be a lot cheaper than that. And also there are certain ways that you can get it approved by insurance, I believe. It really depends. I've seen some services where it's like $100 a year in order to keep it, which is something that is manageable if you have a little bit of income, or if your parents are willing to provide that income. But yeah, I'm somebody that I support public healthcare, as in people being able to access the healthcare they need without having to pay for it. There are better outcomes in the public healthcare systems of other countries than we have in the U.S. And so I would want this to be provided as a free service, even by, say, like gender clinics. Like there's no reason why they couldn't provide sperm banking as a service on the spot before they prescribe puberty blockers. I think that would be a great way to alleviate those concerns.
Yeah, I think we cleared that up for like, the breastfeeding and non-binary topic.
Mm-hmm.
So we should move on to the last point,
Yeah.
So as another context for your viewers, because they might have forgotten. So the other topic was, how there's like a war between LGBT versus LGBTQ, LGB versus LGBT, LGB versus LGBTQ.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I honestly feel very bad. Like I personally do not agree with the LGB, that sector who wants to cut away from the T. And, it sucks because, the Stonewall riots and just all that stuff, it's super it's kind of depressing that, you know, the community just thinks of the trans community as insane because, you know, all these recent um, situations. And yeah, it kind of sucks. And you know how, and yeah, that's kind of it.
Yeah,
And how the LGBT wants to cut away from the LGBTQA or LGBT with the two spirits and everything. Oh, yeah, I will kind of want to know, like, what do you, yeah, I want to know what your insight is on this.
Absolutely. So I think that it's very clear that we have greater strength in numbers. The more people we have in the queer community who are advocating collectively for our rights, who are, you know, interested in learning about the lived experience of those whose lives might differ than their own, and genuinely advocating on their behalf in the face of injustice, the more we have of that, the stronger we are. Ultimately, you know, if we draw the line at LG versus LGB versus LGBT versus LGBTQ, or wherever we draw that line, there's a degree of arbitrariety in where we draw that line. Like, it's not an objective criteria. It's based off of how people feel about certain groups and certain communities. And I would hope that anybody who truly cares about the plight of the marginalized would also care about the plight of those who are marginalized for different reasons than they are. Just like how the trans activists were allies to the gay community in Stonewall, I think that the gay community should also be allies to trans people, especially in the modern era with the unprecedented legislative assault against trans people. We are stronger when we have more numbers, both in voting blocks and in, you know, protests, in social spaces. As a community, we are stronger the bigger our community is. And there are certainly some things that we can do to make sure that, you know, nobody's voice goes unheard, and that we you know, are able to accurately discuss the lived experience of different communities, different needs. But it's important to note that there's a lot of overlap between all of these communities. Like, for example, marriage rights, one of the biggest things that the gay community has fought for, also impacts queer people, also impacts trans people. Trans people and their ability to receive a marriage will depend on how the state views their gender and whether or not they believe that they are allowed to be married. And so for something like the marriage issue, that's something that we can build a really strong bridge of allyship over because we have that shared goal. When we're talking about like non-binary people and trans people, if we're talking about things like social acceptance, if we're talking about things like having access to change gender markers in order to have an ID that's actually congruent with how you present yourself, these are things that non-binary people and trans people share as goals. And so I think that when we have all of these shared goals, all of these overlapping goals, and when we have people who are legitimately marginalized for unique reasons, I think that we should work together to tackle all those issues. That seems like the broadest, strongest coalition that we can build.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I definitely agree in some aspects that, you know, sometimes we need to stick together for these kind of things because, well, you know, right-leaning people that are from the LGBT can definitely, you know, confuse people who are trying to advocate for rights, just disagree with some stuff, to people who are just straight up being homophobic or transphobic, you know. There's some, you know, trans people who advocate for Matt Walsh when Matt Walsh is just, you know, everyone can say, like, even Buck, even Blaire agree that he is just transphobic. He just does not believe in trans people.
Yeah, you don't really see them attacking Matt Walsh, like, pretty much ever, though. That's kind of strange, right?
Yeah, it is kind of strange. Like, I've definitely seen Blaire recently. She's been talking about recently about, you know, Ben Shapiro because of, you know, his takes on, you know, gun rights and for trans people, saying how people with dysphoria does not need to, you know, get their hands on guns, which is like very bizarre. But, you know, Ben Shapiro's Ben Shapiro, you know.
Yeah. It just seems very strange to me that, like, you know, Blaire White's most 6 recent videos are her attacking other trans people and other queer people, when I don't think she's ever made a video about, like, Matt Walsh. You know, that's kind of strange, right?
Well, probably. So there's something I want to know too, which is, you know, kind of my final question is, what is your insight on self-ID? You know, when someone like starts like transitioning, socially transitioning, and, you know, starts, let's say, without any medical transitions, or let's say some people who haven't, you know, shaved off their beard yet, going into women's restrooms and all that stuff.
Well, I think that people that are going into a bathroom just want to pee. And if somebody is like doing something that is predatory in a bathroom, then that's already a crime and they should be tried as a criminal. But if nothing criminal is going on, I'd say just like let people pee. I mean, that's the system we currently have. Like, unless you want like guards posted at bathrooms that are checking people's genitals, just let people pee. I guess like, people can absolutely like. I think that it is the case overwhelmingly, just in how people actually live their lives, that they are going to choose the bathroom that is going to make the least amount of people uncomfortable. In all of the non-binary people, trans people that I know and I have talked to, they have been so apprehensive about going to bathrooms in general because they don't want to make people uncomfortable, and they are micromanaging where and how people perceive them so that they will choose to go into the bathroom, which makes the least amount of people uncomfortable. But in general, I mean, if somebody wants to express themselves a certain way, if somebody wants to identify as like a certain gender, and that is a sincere identity that they hold, then who am I to strip them of their American freedom? I love freedom.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I personally feel how, it is true. Like we don't need guards, checking your genitals or
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. And we most certainly, I think, should, let people who uh, tries, on their transition, but leading into the restrooms. But it's definitely, kind of feels unsafe sometimes when like, you know, as you said, predators come in and just make disturbances and just start being a creep.
Well,
And
somebody's being
yeah,
predatory. That's
I
already a
definitely think
crime, and they should be tried for that. Absolutely. But that has nothing to do
yeah.
with trans people.
I mean, it kind of correlates because you know how people like some predators are clinging into the trans identity without being trans.
No, I don't know about that. But also, whether or not they're trans or whether or not they claim to be trans has nothing to should not dictate in any way whether or not their behavior is considered predatory. Like, if they do something predatory, whether or not they want to call themselves trans, they still committed a crime and they should still be charged for it. It's that simple.
Well, yeah, I guess with it's over. Thank you for letting me come here and answer all my questions and
Yeah.
giving me your points and everything. And just I like your earring, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love the earring. I really appreciate you coming on. I think this was a fantastic convo. I think that you have a good head on your shoulders and that you really want to learn more and you really want to do good. My biggest worry is that you might fall deeper into a kind of content rabbit hole that just is full of people that do not have your best intentions or the best intentions of marginalized people in mind. People like Blaire White and Buck Angel and Ariel Scarcella, they do not care about the plight of the marginalized, and it's very clear in their content, in what they focus on, that that's not the case. And I just worry that falling down that kind of content rabbit hole can be harmful in ways that I don't think you want to be. And I'm always going to encourage you to keep learning. I want to let you know that there are great, fantastic, loving content creators out there. You are absolutely welcome in the Nom Nom community. Would love to have you along for what we do over here on Twitch. And thank you so much. Best of luck on your journey.
Thank you. And just a little question. I know,
Mhm.
well, just a question because it's totally okay if you say no because our contents, like the things I say in my Twitter or the things you're saying on your Twitter are very different.
Mhm.
But maybe we could get like a follow back maybe because maybe we have our disagreements, but I definitely respect you a lot. And yeah, that's kind of it.
Sure, I can give you a follow back. Hey, it'll put better content on your feed anyways, so why not?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You have a lovely rest of your night. I appreciate the convo.
Yeah. Thank you. You have a good night too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. I am really, really happy with how that convo went. Yeah, she was incredibly good faith, which is really, really refreshing to see. Like it's so rare for me to encounter somebody who is so good faith, who actually engages in the conversation, and was very open to learning and open to, thinking about their actions and their beliefs and the consequences of those. And I hope that she only goes in a good direction. I wish her the best. Very wholesome. Very wholesome.